The docking clamps took 3 tries to connect. The Ascendant Crown's hull was organic, and it did not fit neatly with human technology. Eli Greer, the Longhorn's tech specialist, had to override 4 safety systems and rig a manual seal before the airlock finally held. Even then, the connection groaned and shifted, like it might come apart at any second. "Good enough," Cole said. He pulled his helmet on, checked the seal, and looked at the 2 people standing behind him. Nora Finch, the team medic, was already carrying 2 bags of supplies, one over each shoulder, her face set in the calm, focused expression she always wore when she knew things were going to be bad. Eli Greer stood beside her, a tablet in one hand and a sidearm in the other, looking like he was not sure which one he would need more. "Rules are simple," Cole told them. "Stay close, stay quiet. Do not point your weapons at anyone unless I tell you to. These are their people, their ship, and their home. We are guests. Guests who were not invited," Eli muttered. "Then we will be polite," Cole said, and he opened the airlock. The smell hit them first. It was copper and something sweet, like rotting flowers left in warm water. The air was thick and wet, and it stuck to their skin the moment they stepped inside. The corridor ahead of them was not like any ship they had ever seen. There were no straight lines, no metal panels. The walls curved and pulsed faintly, made of something that looked like dark purple muscle stretched over bone. The floor was soft under their boots. The ceiling dripped with a thin, clear liquid that Nora immediately told them not to touch. "This ship is alive," Eli whispered, staring at the walls. "Or it was." "Focus," Cole said. They moved forward. The corridors were wide enough for 3 humans to walk side by side, but they had been built for Velnari, who were taller and broader. Everything felt oversized. The doorways were high, the ceilings were far above their heads, and everywhere they looked, there were bodies. Velnari soldiers lay where they had fallen. Some were curled up, their forearms wrapped around wounds that had not stopped bleeding before they died. Some were still holding weapons, frozen in their last moment of fighting. Their exoskeletons, which in life were a deep shimmering blue-black, had turned gray in death. Their compound eyes stared at nothing. Nora counted them as they walked. She stopped counting at 60. They found the command chamber at the heart of the ship. It was a massive room, round like the inside of an egg, with the Queen's throne at the center on a raised platform. The walls were covered in screens, most of them cracked or dark, and the few that still worked showed the wreckage outside in flickering, broken images. Queen Thyravine was sitting on her throne. She was tall, nearly 8 feet, with a body that was part insect and part something else entirely. Something elegant and strange that human biology had no word for. Her remaining 3 arms rested on the arms of her throne. Her severed limb was wrapped in dark paste that had hardened like a cast. Her compound eyes caught the dim light and reflected it back in fragments. Around her stood her last defenders, 27 Velnari soldiers in damaged armor, and a handful of attendants in thin robes stained with blood that was not their own. The moment Cole's team stepped through the door, every weapon in the room turned toward them. Cole stopped. He raised one hand slowly, palm out. Behind him, Nora and Eli froze. "We received your distress signal," Cole said. His voice was steady. "We are from the human vessel Longhorn. We are here to help." The translation came through a moment later, processed by the matrix built into the Queen's throne. The Velnari soldiers did not lower their weapons. Their mandibles clicked in what might have been anger or fear, or both. Thyravine looked at Cole for a long time. Her eyes moved over him, over his armor, his weapon, the 2 small humans behind him. She saw how tiny they were compared to her soldiers, how soft their bodies looked, how fragile. When she spoke, her voice came through the translation matrix cold and hard, like stones dropping into still water. "We did not ask for human help." "Your signal said please," Cole replied. The room went very quiet. Several of the Valnari attendants looked at each other. One of the soldiers shifted his weight, and his armor creaked in the silence. Thyravine's eyes narrowed. The Valnari do not beg. We do not lower ourselves before lesser species. If you came here expecting gratitude, you will leave disappointed. I did not come here expecting anything, Cole said. I came here because someone was dying. Then you came here to watch, the Queen said, because that is all you can do. Your small ship and your small weapons cannot stand against the hollow swarm. Duskfang commands a fleet that has destroyed civilizations older than your entire species. You cannot help us. You can only die beside us, and I will not have human blood on my conscience. Cole looked at her. He looked at the bodies of her guards on the floor. He looked at the stump of her severed arm. He looked at the dark markings on her skin that should have been glowing with light and life, but were instead fading like embers in rain. Then he did something that no one in the room expected. He knelt. He placed his rifle on the ground in front of him, and he looked up at her with steady eyes, and said, "We did not come here out of pity. We came because someone was dying, and we were close enough to help. That is all." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Thyravine stared at the human kneeling before her. In her entire life, no one had ever knelt to her by choice. Her subjects knelt because tradition demanded it. Her enemies knelt because they were beaten. But this human, this small, soft creature, from a species her people had barely acknowledged, was kneeling not because he had to, but because he chose to. He was making himself vulnerable in a room full of armed soldiers who could kill him in a heartbeat. And his eyes did not waver. She did not understand it. She could not find a place for it in the framework of everything she knew about the universe. Before she could respond, the ship screamed. Every alarm on the Ascendant Crown went off at once. The few working screens flashed red. The floor shuddered beneath them, and somewhere deep in the ship, something groaned like a living thing in pain. Cole was on his feet in an instant, his rifle back in his hands. What is happening? One of the Valnari engineers shouted something in their own language, and the translation came a second later, broken and rushed. Ships, many ships, dropping out of faster than light. They are here. The swarm is here. Captain Beckett's voice came through Cole's earpiece, tight with controlled fear. Sergeant, we have a problem. I am counting 43 warships. They just appeared all around us. We are completely surrounded. Cole looked at the screens. He could see them now. Dark shapes sliding out of the blackness of space, like predators emerging from tall grass. Duskfang's fleet. They were everywhere, forming a ring around the two crippled ships, and they were closing in. A transmission cut through every speaker on both ships. The voice was deep and distorted, like something speaking through broken glass. It was Duskfang. Thyravine, the voice said, last queen of a dead empire, I see you found a pet. How sweet. It will not save you. Surrender yourself to me for public execution, and I will let your remaining people live. Refuse, and I will crack that ship open like a shell and pull you out piece by piece. The room looked at the queen. Her soldiers looked at her. Her attendants looked at her. Cole looked at her. Thyravine stood. It was slow, painful, and it took everything she had. But she stood. She straightened her back. She lifted her 3 remaining arms, and she began to walk toward the communication panel. She was going to accept. Cole stepped in front of her. He did not say anything dramatic. He did not make a speech. He just stood there, between the queen and the panel. Then he turned his back to her, touched his earpiece, and said, Captain Beckett, this is Harding. Tell the crew to prepare for combat. We are not leaving, and the queen is not surrendering. There was a pause on the other end. Then Beckett's voice came back, and there was something in it that sounded almost like a smile. "Understood, Sergeant. All hands, battle stations." Thyravine stood behind Cole, staring at the back of his head. This human, this tiny creature, had just declared war on an army that had destroyed an empire. For her, for a queen who had called his species lesser. She did not understand humans. She was beginning to think she never would. The first wave hit 20 minutes later. Duskfang did not wait. He did not give them time to prepare. The moment his ultimatum was refused, he sent 3 boarding ships slamming into the lower hull of the Ascendant Crown like fists punching through a wall. The organic shell of the ship tore open, and swarm soldiers poured inside, fast and hungry, and screaming in a language that the translation matrix could not process, because it was not really language at all. It was just noise. The sound of something that wanted to kill. On the Longhorn, Captain Beckett fought her own battle. The little exploration ship was never built for war, but human engineers had always believed in building things tougher than they needed to be. The shields held against the first barrage. The second barrage cracked them. Beckett ordered power rerouted from every non-essential system, and Danny Voss, who had argued against coming here in the first place, turned out to be the best tactical officer she had ever seen when the pressure was real. Voss studied the swarm formation for exactly 40 seconds. Then he said, "They are coordinated but predictable. They attack in waves from the same vectors. If we rotate our shield facing between volleys and hit them during their recharge cycle, we can hold." "For how long?" Beckett asked. "Long enough," Voss said. "Maybe." It was not a comforting answer, but it was an honest one, and Beckett respected honest more than comforting. She gave the order. Inside the Ascendant Crown, Cole had a different kind of problem. The Velnari soldiers were brave. He could see that immediately. They stood their ground, and they fought hard, and they did not run even when the enemy came at them in numbers that should have broken any unit. But they fought wrong. They fought in rigid formations, standing shoulder to shoulder in straight lines, firing in synchronized volleys, like soldiers from a textbook written 1,000 years ago. It was beautiful in a way. It was also going to get them all killed. The swarm did not fight in lines. The swarm fought like water, flowing around obstacles, filling every gap, coming from every direction at once. They were smaller than the Velnari soldiers, but they were fast, and there were so many of them. Cole grabbed the nearest Velnari officer, a scarred veteran named Kethran, who seemed to be in charge of what was left of the military, and spoke quickly through his helmet's translation system. "Your formations are too rigid. The enemy is flanking you every time. You need to break into small teams, 3 soldiers per team. Each team covers a section of corridor. Use the ship's layout. These walls curve. These ceilings are low in places. Use that. Force them into tight spaces where their numbers do not matter." Kethran stared at him. His mandibles clicked slowly, which Cole had already learned meant the Velnari equivalent of deep skepticism. "You want us to abandon our formation, the formation that has been the foundation of Velnari warfare for 600 years. "I want you to survive," Cole said. "You can go back to your formations after we win." Kethran looked at the corridor behind him, where 4 of his soldiers had just fallen to a swarm flanking attack that had come through an air duct they had not been covering. He looked back at Cole. Then he barked an order in Velnari, and the remaining soldiers broke apart and reformed into small groups, just as Cole had said. It worked. Not perfectly, not cleanly. The Velnari were not used to thinking in small units, and their communication was clumsy at first. But they adapted faster than Cole had expected. Within an hour, the swarm's advance had been stopped. Not pushed back, but stopped. And for now, that was enough. While Cole held the corridors, Nora Finch turned the Queen's command chamber into a hospital. She had set up a triage station using supplies from both the Longhorn and whatever she could find on the Ascendant Crown. The Velnari wounded were brought to her in a steady stream, carried by their companions, and Nora treated every single one of them. It was not easy. Velnari biology was nothing like human biology. Their blood was a thick, greenish fluid that burned human skin on contact, leaving red welts that blistered within seconds. The first time Nora touched a wounded soldier without gloves, her hand swelled up so badly she could not use it for 10 minutes. After that, she rigged a containment protocol using emergency sealing tape and the plastic lining from medical supply bags. It worked. The Velnari medics watched her with wide, unblinking eyes. They had already given up on 11 of their wounded, marking them with a dark paste on their foreheads that meant beyond saving. Nora looked at those 11 soldiers and said, "No." She worked on them one by one. She used human clotting agents modified on the fly, mixed with Velnari healing compounds that the alien medics told her would not be compatible. She tried anyway. She adjusted dosages. She improvised. She made mistakes and fixed them, and made more mistakes and fixed those too. 9 of the 11 survived. The Velnari medics did not say thank you. They did not have the words for what they were feeling. But one of them, a young female with pale markings, brought Nora a cup of warm liquid that tasted terrible, but was clearly meant as a gift. Nora drank every drop. In the lower decks, Eli Greer was elbow-deep in the ship's systems, and what he found changed everything. The Ascendant Crown's power came from a biocore, a massive organic reactor at the center of the ship that was part of the ship itself. The Velnari had told them it was dead. They had watched it shut down during the first battle, and had accepted its loss the way they accepted everything, with grim dignity and no hope of reversal. Eli did not accept anything. He connected his tablet to the ship's nervous system through a crude interface he built from a human data cable and a piece of Velnari neural tissue, and he spent 4 hours mapping the biocore's status. What he found made him sit down on the floor and whisper a word that his mother would not have approved of. The biocore was not dead. It was dormant. It had shut itself down as a survival response, the way some Earth animals play dead when a predator is near. The core had sensed the overwhelming damage to the ship, and had pulled all its energy inward, protecting itself, waiting. It could be restarted. If the biocore came back online, the Ascendant Crown's weapons would activate. The ship had firepower that made the Longhorn look like a toy. It could turn the battle around in minutes. But there was a problem. The normal restart process required a Velnari Royal to interface directly with the core through a neural link built into the ship. Firavine was injured too badly to survive the process, and the core's emergency restart required someone to physically enter the bioreactor chamber and connect with the organic system by hand. For a Velnari, this would be agonizing but survivable. Their biology was compatible with the core. For a human, whose nervous system was completely alien to the ship's organic technology, it could be fatal. The core would read a human body as an invader. The pain alone could stop a heart. Eli brought the information to Cole, who was leaning against a wall between attacks, bleeding from a cut on his forehead and breathing hard. "I can bring this ship back to life," Eli said, "but someone has to go into the core chamber and do it manually. And it has to be one of us, because the Queen cannot survive it in her condition, and none of the remaining Velnari have the royal neural signature the core responds to. If it does not respond to Velnari soldiers, why would it respond to a human?" Cole asked. Eli hesitated. "It might not, but the core is semi-sentient. It makes decisions based on input it receives. If someone goes in there and gives it a strong enough signal, it might wake up, or it might kill whoever tries." Cole looked down the corridor. He could hear the swarm regrouping. He could hear the Velnari soldiers checking their weapons. He could hear, faintly, the sound of Nora talking to a wounded soldier in a calm voice that made everything seem like it was going to be okay, even when it was not. He looked back at Eli. How do I get to the core chamber? Eli stared at him. Cole, did you hear the part where I said it could kill you? I heard it, Cole said. How do I get there? Queen Thyravine watched all of this from her throne. She watched the human soldiers fight beside her people. She watched the human medics save lives that her own doctors had abandoned. She watched the human technician dig into the heart of her ship and find hope where none should have existed. During a brief pause in the fighting, she called Cole to her. He came, still carrying his rifle, still bleeding from the cut on his head. He stood before her and waited. Why? She asked. The single word carried more weight than a speech. Cole looked at her. He did not flinch under the gaze of those massive compound eyes. Where I come from, he said, you do not leave people behind. Not strangers, not enemies, not people who think they are better than you. He paused. Especially not them. Because if you only help the people who are nice to you, that is not kindness. That is just business. Thyravine was quiet for a long time. You are a strange species, she said finally. Yeah, Cole said. We get that a lot. He turned and walked back to the fighting. Behind him, the queen sat very still on her throne. And if anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed that the bioluminescent markings on her skin, the ones that had been dark and fading for hours, flickered. Just once. Just for a moment. The Riftborn came on the third wave. Cole had heard the Velnari soldiers talk about them in whispers between the fighting, the way soldiers everywhere talk about the thing they fear most. The Riftborn were not like the regular swarm fighters. They were bigger, faster, bred in the deep hives of Duskfang's territory, raised on nothing but combat and hunger, built to be the last thing their enemies ever saw. When they breached the hull, Cole understood why the Velnari feared them. They were enormous, nearly 10 feet tall, with armored exoskeletons that were black and ridged like volcanic rock. They moved with a speed that should have been impossible for something that large, and they hit like freight trains. The first one through the breach killed 3 Velnari soldiers in 4 seconds, tearing through their armor with claws that cut through metal like it was paper. Cole opened fire. His rifle rounds bounced off the Riftborn's chestplate and did nothing. He switched to armor-piercing rounds and aimed for the joints, the thin gaps between the plates where the exoskeleton was weakest. The rounds punched through. The creature stumbled. It did not fall. Aim for the joints, Cole shouted into his translation unit. Forget the chest. Hit the knees, the elbows, the neck. The Velnari adapted. They were learning. Kethron's teams shifted their fire patterns, and the Riftborn advance slowed. But it did not stop. More were coming. Always more. The outer decks fell within the hour. Cole pulled everyone back to the intersections, collapsing the defense perimeter around the command chamber and the biocore. The corridors were narrow here, which helped. The Riftborn could not move as freely in tight spaces. But it also meant there was nowhere left to retreat. Cole found Eli in a maintenance alcove, still working on his tablet, his fingers moving so fast they blurred. Tell me you have a plan, Cole said. I have a route to the biocore chamber, Eli said. It is 3 levels down, through a section of the ship that the Sworn has not reached yet. The organic walls are thicker down there. It will take them time to cut through. But Cole, I need to tell you something about the interface process. Talk fast. The biocore is semi-sentient. It thinks sort of. Not like us. More like a dreaming animal. When you connect with it, it is going to read your entire nervous system. Every signal your brain sends, every nerve impulse, every electrical pattern. And because you are human, it is going to interpret all of that as a threat. It will try to shut you down the same way it shut itself down. It will attack your nervous system directly. How long do I need to hold on? I do not know. 30 seconds, a minute, maybe more. Long enough for the core to realize you are not an enemy and start responding to your commands instead of fighting them. And if it does not realize that? Eli was quiet for a moment. Then your nervous system collapses. your heart stops, and you die in a room full of alien biology that nobody on this ship fully understands. Cole nodded slowly. Okay. Okay? That is all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Eli? We are out of time. The outer decks are gone. The swarm is pushing through the intersections. Captain Beckett's shields are going to fail within the hour. If I don't get that core online, everyone on both ships dies. The Queen, her people, our people, everyone. He looked at Eli, and for just a second, the tiredness fell away from his eyes, and something else showed through. Something hard and bright and absolutely certain. I did not come all the way out here to watch people die. Not again. Cole memorized it, checked his rifle, and headed for the lower decks. He ran into Firavine at the entrance to the lower corridor. She was standing there as if she had known he was coming. Maybe she had. The ship was alive, in its way, and she was connected to it in ways humans could not fully understand. You are going to the core, she said. It was not a question. Yes. It will kill you. It might. No. Her voice was sharp, harder than he had heard it before. You do not understand. The biocore of a Valnari warship is one of the most powerful organic systems ever created. It was designed to bond with royal blood. My mother's blood, my grandmother's blood. It has been alive for over 400 years, and in all that time, it has never been touched by anything that was not Valnari. When it feels your mind, it will not be confused. It will not hesitate. It will destroy you. Your Majesty, with all respect, your core has never met a human before. It does not know what we are capable of. And what are you capable of? Being too stubborn to die when something tells us to. She stared at him. Her compound eyes shifted through colors he could not name, patterns he could not read. Then she did something that surprised him. She reached out with one of her remaining arms and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her fingers were long and hard, covered in the fine ridges of her exoskeleton, and they were warm. If you die in there, she said quietly, I will remember your name. I will make sure my people remember it. For as long as the Valnari exist, they will know that a human gave his life for their queen. I would rather you remember me alive, Cole said. It is a better story. He turned and walked into the darkness of the lower decks. The biocore chamber was deep in the belly of the ship, behind 3 sealed doors that Eli had to open remotely from above. Each door was organic, thick slabs of muscle and bone that pulled apart slowly, reluctantly, as if the ship itself did not want him to enter. The chamber was vast. Cole stepped inside and felt like he had stepped into the chest of a giant. The walls were ribbed, curving upward into a ceiling he could barely see. The floor was soft and warm and pulsed beneath his feet with a slow, weak rhythm. And at the center of the room, filling most of it, was the biocore. It was beautiful and terrifying, a massive structure of intertwined organic tissue, part plant and part nerve cluster, and part something that had no name in any human language. It glowed faintly, a deep amber color, and tendrils of tissue hung from it like the roots of an ancient tree. The air was thick and warm, and smelled like soil after rain. Cole took off his helmet. He took off his gloves. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it with nothing between himself and the core. He walked to the center of the chamber, where a cluster of neural tendrils hung low enough to reach, and he looked at the crude interface device Eli had built. It was a metal plate connected to wires, connected to a piece of Valnari neural tissue, and it looked like something a child had put together from spare parts. Eli, Cole said into his earpiece, if this thing kills me, do not blame yourself. This was my choice. Just do not die, Eli said. I am terrible at eulogies. Cole grabbed the neural tendrils with both hands and pressed the interface against his chest. The pain was instant. It was not like being shot. It was not like being burned. It was like every nerve in his body caught fire at the same time. like his brain was being pulled apart thread by thread and examined by something enormous and ancient and completely alien. His vision went white, his legs buckled, he fell to his knees, but he did not let go. The biocore screamed through his nervous system. It found his brain and it tore through it like a storm through a house, looking for something familiar and finding nothing. Human neural patterns were wrong, human biology was wrong, everything about him was wrong, and the core responded the only way it knew how. It tried to shut him down. Cole's heart stuttered, his muscles locked, blood ran from his nose and his ears. The pain was beyond anything he had ever imagined, beyond anything he had words for. Every part of his body was telling him to let go, to break the connection, to save himself. He did not let go. He thought about Pete. He thought about his little brother running into that collapsing corridor on Callisto Station, running toward the danger instead of away from it, because someone needed help. Pete had been scared. Cole knew that, but Pete had gone anyway. He thought about the Velnari soldiers upstairs, fighting and dying. He thought about Nora, working on wounded aliens with burned hands and a stubborn refusal to give up. He thought about Captain Beckett, standing on the bridge of a ship that was never meant for war, holding the line because someone had to. He thought about Thyravine, the queen who was ready to die rather than kneel, the queen who had called humans lesser and then watched a human kneel before her by choice. The queen who had put her hand on his shoulder and promised to remember his name. He held on, and the biocore felt it. Not his biology, not his neural patterns, not the electrical signals that it could not understand and could not process. It felt something else. Something underneath all of that. A signal that was not made of electricity or chemistry or any physical process that the core had encountered in 400 years of existence. It was will. Pure, raw, stupid, stubborn, human will. The kind of signal that said, I will not stop. The kind that said, I will hold on until my body breaks, and then I will hold on with whatever is left. The kind that had no logic behind it, no evolutionary advantage, no rational explanation. Just a decision made by a small creature in a vast universe that said, no, I am not letting go. The biocore did not understand it, but it recognized it. It recognized it the way a sleeping animal recognizes the touch of something that means no harm. Not with thought, with instinct. The core stopped fighting, and then it woke up. The ascendant crown came alive like a giant taking its first breath after a long sleep. Systems activated in cascading waves, one after another, spreading outward from the biocore chamber like a heartbeat pumping life through veins. The weapon systems powered up with a deep hum that shook the walls. The shields flickered and then blazed to full strength. On the bridge, Thyravine watched her ship reawaken around her. The screens came back to life, bright and clear. The tactical displays showed her fleet, what was left of it, and the enemy surrounding them. And they showed her something else. They showed her the weapons array, fully charged, fully operational, ready to fire. Her markings blazed. For the first time in days, they burned bright, filling the command chamber with blue-white light. Her soldiers stared at her. Her attendants fell to their knees. Queen Thyravine stood tall. She raised her 3 arms. She looked at the enemy fleet on her screens, and her voice rang through the ship like a bell. Fire. The Ascendant Crown's weapons were unlike anything human engineering had ever produced. The ship fired, and the darkness of space turned white. Beams of concentrated bioenergy lanced outward from the Crown's hull, each one as wide as the Longhorn itself, each one carrying enough force to crack a moon. They cut through Duskfang's fleet like a blade through wet cloth. The first 3 swarm warships did not even have time to raise shields. They simply came apart. their hulls splitting open and their insides spilling into the vacuum in clouds of metal and fire. On the Longhorn, Captain Beckett watched through the viewport and forgot how to breathe for a full 5 seconds. Danny Voss stood beside her, and for the first time in the entire battle, he had nothing to say. The swarm fleet reacted with panic. Ships broke formation, scattering in every direction like insects fleeing from light. They had come here expecting to finish off a dying ship and a tiny human vessel. They had not expected the Crown to wake up. They had not planned for this. Duskfang had told them the Crown was dead. Duskfang had been wrong. Captain Beckett, Thyravine's voice came through on the human communication channel, clear and strong, and burning with something that sounded very much like joy. "Will you fight beside me?" Beckett smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 12 hours. "It would be our pleasure, Your Majesty." "Voss, coordinate with the Crown. Give them our targeting data. Let us finish this." The two ships moved together, the massive Velnari warship and the small human cruiser, side by side, firing in coordinated patterns that Voss and the Velnari tactical officers worked out in real time. The Longhorn was fast and nimble, darting between enemy ships and drawing their fire. The Crown was slow but devastating, its weapons erasing anything the Longhorn pointed at. One by one the swarm warships fell. Some tried to fight. They died quickly. Some tried to run. They died slowly. The ring of enemy ships that had seemed so unbreakable an hour ago was coming apart, and with each ship that fell, the ring got thinner. Duskfang's flagship, a massive dark vessel covered in spines and sharp angles, tried to break away. It turned and burned its engines at full power, heading for the edge of the system and the safety of faster-than-light travel. Thyravine saw it on her screens. She watched the ship that carried the warlord who had destroyed her empire try to run away, and something cold and ancient settled into her chest. Not anger, not hatred, something deeper than both. She opened a channel. Her voice went out across every frequency, and every ship in the system heard it, human and Velnari and swarm alike. "Duskfang, you told me the Velnari were finished. You told me I was the last queen of a dead empire. You told me to kneel." She paused. "The Velnari are not dead. And I do not kneel, not to you, not to anyone. Run if you want. It will not save you." The Crown's main weapon fired one last time, a single beam of white gold energy that crossed the distance between them in less than a heartbeat. It hit Duskfang's flagship dead center. The explosion lit up the system like a second sun. When it faded, there was nothing left. Not debris, not wreckage. Nothing. Duskfang and everything he had built, everything he had stolen, everything he had destroyed to get to this point was simply gone. The surviving swarm ships, fewer than a dozen, scattered into faster than light and disappeared. They would not be coming back. The battle was over. Silence settled over both ships like snow falling on still water. On the Longhorn, the crew sat at their stations and stared at their screens, and tried to understand what they had just been part of. On the Crown, Velnari soldiers lowered their weapons and looked at each other with eyes that did not quite believe what they were seeing. And then someone needed to find Cole. Nora ran. She had not run like this since medical school, when she was late for her final exam and thought her entire career was over. She ran through corridors that were now lit and alive, past Velnari soldiers who stepped aside for her without a word, down 3 levels to the biocore chamber. The doors were open. The chamber was warm and glowing with a soft amber light, and the biocore pulsed with a strong, steady rhythm that shook the floor gently, like a heartbeat. And there, on the floor at the base of the core, was Cole. He was unconscious. His hands were still wrapped around the neural tendrils, and his fingers were locked so tight that Nora had to pry them loose one by one. His nose had bled. His skin was pale and cold, and when she pressed her fingers to his neck, she could barely find a pulse. "I need help down here," she shouted into her comm. "Medical emergency. Biocore chamber, now." She started working. She cleared his airway. She started chest compressions when his heart stopped the first time. It came back after 30 seconds of compressions that left her arms burning. It stopped again 2 minutes later, and she brought it back again. The Velnari healers arrived. They stood in the doorway of the chamber and watched the human medic beating on the chest of the human soldier, forcing his heart to keep going through nothing but physical force and refusal to accept the alternative. One of them stepped forward. She was the same young healer who had brought Nora the warm drink earlier. She knelt beside Nora and said, in halting translated words, "We can help. Our healing methods, they are different, but we can try." She was exhausted. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were red and wet. "Do it," she said. "Whatever you have, do it." They worked together, human medicine and Velnari biohealing, side by side, two systems that had never been designed to work together and had no reason to be compatible. Nora injected human stimulants, while the Velnari healer applied organic compounds directly to Cole's skin. Nora monitored his heart rate on a human scanner, while the Velnari monitored his neural activity through the ship's own sensors. They spoke different languages. They used different tools. They had different training and different instincts and different ideas about what the body needed to survive. But they both wanted the same thing. They both wanted this man to live. Cole's heart stopped a second time. Nora brought it back. The Velnari healer placed her hands on his chest and did something that Nora could not explain, something that made the air hum and the biocore pulse brighter for just a moment. Cole's heart started again. It did not stop after that. He woke up 3 days later in a Velnari healing alcove, a cocoon of warm organic tissue that had been slowly repairing his damaged nerves while he slept. He opened his eyes and saw a ceiling made of something that looked like living wood, pulsing gently with soft light. He tried to move and found that everything hurt. Then he turned his head and saw Queen Thyravine sitting beside him, not on a throne, not surrounded by guards or attendants or the trappings of royalty, just sitting there, on a low seat that had grown from the floor of the chamber, watching him. Her markings glowed softly, a calm blue that he had not seen before. Her 3 arms were folded in her lap. She looked tired. She looked relieved. She looked like someone who had been sitting in that exact spot for a very long time. "You are alive," she said. "Seems like it," Cole managed. His voice sounded like gravel. "The healers were not certain you would wake. Your nervous system suffered extensive damage. The biocore was not gentle with you." "I noticed." She was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward, and her compound eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made the rest of the room disappear. "In Velnari culture," she said, "when a person saves the life of the queen, they are granted the title of Venthara. It is our highest honor. It means one who stands between the queen and the dark. In the entire history of my people, it has been granted fewer than 20 times. It has never been offered to someone who is not Velnari." She paused. "I am offering it to you, Cole Harding, not because of tradition, not because of obligation, because you earned it. Because you walked into the heart of my ship, and you held on when any sane creature would have let go. Because you stood in front of me when I was ready to die, and you told me, without saying it, that dying was not an option." Cole looked at her. His body was broken, and his mind was foggy, and he was in more pain than he had ever been in his life. But he managed a small, crooked smile. "Does the title come with better food? Because whatever your healers have been putting in my system tastes like engine grease mixed with old socks." There was a silence. And then Thyravine made a sound. It was not a sound the translation matrix knew how to handle. It came out garbled, processed as a series of clicks and hums that did not map to any word in any language. Nora, who was checking Cole's vitals nearby, looked up in confusion. Then she realized what was happening. The Queen was laughing. It was the first time any human had ever heard a Valnari Queen laugh. It was strange and musical, and not at all what any of them would have expected. And it filled the healing chamber like warmth filling a cold room. Cole grinned. Even through the pain, even through the exhaustion, even through the knowledge that he had come closer to dying than he ever had before, he grinned. Because making an alien queen laugh after she had watched her empire burn felt like the most human thing he had ever done. The Longhorn and the Ascendant Crown traveled side by side toward human space. It was a slow journey. Both ships needed repairs, and neither was in any rush. The war was not over. There were still swarm factions scattered across Valnari territory, still worlds to reclaim, still a civilization to rebuild. The Queen was alive. Her ship was alive. And for the first time in a long time, there was a future to plan for. Thyravine agreed to open formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Not because she was desperate, not because she had no choice, but because she had watched a handful of humans risk everything for a species that had given them no reason to care. And she had decided that any species capable of that was worth knowing. Captain Beckett recorded her thoughts in the ship's log. She sat alone in her quarters, staring at the screen, trying to find words for what had happened. She typed slowly, carefully, the way she always did when something mattered. First contact protocols did not cover any of this. Nothing in the regulations prepared us for what happened out there. We were supposed to observe and report. We were not supposed to fight a war, save a queen, or restart an alien warship with a marine who was too stubborn to let his heart stop. But I think that is the point. The best things humanity has ever done were never in the manual. They were done by people who saw something wrong and decided to fix it, regardless of the rules. I am proud of this crew. Every single one of them. Danny Voss, who had argued against coming to Valnari space, who had said it was not their problem, wrote his own private entry that night. It was shorter. It said, "I was wrong. I am glad I was wrong." Eli Greer spent most of the return trip in the Ascendant Crown's engineering sections, working with Valnari technicians to study the biocore interface data. He had collected more information about Valnari organic technology in one day than humanity had gathered in 50 years of observation. The Valnari engineers, who had initially refused to share any technical knowledge with outsiders, now showed him everything. They had watched a human bring their ship back to life. Secrecy seemed pointless after that. Nora Finch sat in the medical bay and wrote letters to the families of the 2 Longhorn crew members who had died during the battle. She cried while she wrote them. Then she dried her eyes and went to check on her Valnari patients, who were healing well, and who called her the one with warm hands. And Cole stood at a viewport on the observation deck of the Ascendant Crown, watching the stars slide past. His body was wrapped in Valnari healing tissue. His hands were bandaged. His heartbeat was steady but slow, still recovering from the damage the biocore had done. Thyravine stood beside him. She had come without guards, without attendants, without ceremony. She had simply appeared, the way she did now, drawn to the human who had changed everything. They did not speak. They stood side by side, the alien queen and the human soldier, and they watched the stars together. 2 species that had spent decades misunderstanding each other, separated by biology and culture and pride, brought together by a distress signal, and a man who had knelt on an alien floor and said the simplest, most human thing in the universe. We were close enough to help. That is all. Across the galaxy, the story spread. It moved through diplomatic channels and military reports and news broadcasts, but it also moved through whispers. Species that had never spoken to humans before began to pay attention. Civilizations that had dismissed humanity as young and primitive and irrelevant started to look closer. The humans came, the whispers said. They came when no one expected them. They fought when they did not have to. They bled for strangers. They saved a queen who had never shown them kindness, and they asked for nothing in return. Not for territory, not for power, not for profit, not for glory. Just because someone needed them. And that, the whisper said, is the human way. The Velnari Empire was dying. It had taken centuries to build. Thousands of hive worlds connected by trade routes and ancient bonds, all held together by the will of a single bloodline. The royal queens had ruled since before humans had learned to make fire. They had built cities inside stars. They had tamed black holes. They had spread across the galaxy like a slow, unstoppable tide. And now it was all falling apart. Queen Thyravine sat on her throne aboard the Ascendant Crown, the last great warship of her fleet, and she watched her empire burn. Every screen around her showed the same thing. Worlds on fire, ships breaking apart in the cold silence of space. Distress signals that cut off one by one, like candles blown out by a wind she could not stop. The Hollow Swarm had done this, a faction of her own kind, twisted and hungry, led by a warlord who called himself Duskfang. He had risen from the outer colonies with a simple message. The old ways were dead, and the queen was weak. He promised strength through conquest. He promised survival through destruction. And millions had followed him. Thyravine had fought back. She had sent her best fleets, her finest warriors, her most brilliant commanders, and Duskfang had crushed them all. Not because he was smarter, not because he was braver, but because he did not care how many of his own people died, and Thyravine did. Now she sat alone. Her royal guard lay dead around her, their bodies still warm on the cold metal floor. Her ship was crippled. Her engines were failing. The biocore that powered the Ascendant Crown had gone dark, and without it, the ship was nothing more than a floating coffin drifting near a dying star. She had 27 soldiers left, a handful of attendants, a few engineers who could barely keep the lights on. That was all that remained of the Velnari Empire. One of her arms was gone, severed below the joint in the last battle. The wound had been sealed with emergency paste, but it still throbbed with a deep, sick pain. Her bioluminescent markings, the glowing lines along her skin that showed the health and power of a Velnari royal, had gone almost completely dark. She looked like a ghost sitting on that throne. She felt like one too. She had sent the distress signal against her own pride. It had taken everything she had to press that button. The Velnari did not ask for help. They did not beg. They did not lower themselves before lesser species. But Thyravine was not stupid. She knew the difference between pride and survival, even if the line between them was getting thinner by the hour. She did not expect anyone to come. The signal was weak. It was broadcasting on old frequencies, repeating in broken universal code that most ships would ignore as background noise. And even if someone heard it, why would they come? The Velnari had never been kind to outsiders. They had treated humans like children. They had treated other species like insects. They had built their empire on the belief that they were the greatest civilization in the galaxy, and they had made sure everyone knew it. Now she was paying the price for that arrogance. Far away, on the other side of the galaxy, the human exploratory vessel Longhorn was running a routine deep space patrol along the border of mapped territory. It was not a warship. It was a medium-class exploration cruiser with decent shields, a few gun batteries, and a crew of 93 people who were mostly bored out of their minds. Captain Laura Beckett was sitting in her command chair, drinking her third cup of coffee and reading a report about mineral deposits on a moon nobody cared about, when the communications officer sat up straight and said, "Captain, I am picking up something strange. The signal was faint. It came from deep within Velnari space, a region humans had been told very clearly to stay out of. It was repeating on every frequency, and when they ran it through the translation software, the message was simple. This is the Ascendant Crown. We are under attack. Our fleet is destroyed. Our queen lives. We need help. Anyone. Please. That last word hit the bridge like a hammer. Please. The Velnari did not say please. Not ever. Not to anyone. Beckett put down her coffee. Velnari space was 3 jumps away. It would take them 6 hours to get there. 6 hours during which anything could happen. Her tactical officer, Danny Voss, a tall man with a sharp jaw and sharper opinions, spoke up immediately. Captain, that is not our problem. We have no treaty with the Velnari. We have no obligation. And if we jump into the middle of their civil war, we are going to get killed. He was not wrong. Beckett knew he was not wrong. But she also knew what that word meant. Please. Coming from a species that would rather die than ask for help, that single word carried more weight than 1,000 pages of diplomatic language. She turned to her crew. Anyone here want to ignore a dying species because they were rude to us at a few diplomatic dinners? Nobody said anything. Good, Beckett said. Set course for Velnari space. Best speed. Down in the Marine quarters, Sergeant Cole Harding felt the ship shift under his feet as the engine spun up for a jump. He was sitting on his bunk, cleaning his rifle, the way he always did when he had nothing else to do. It was a habit that kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. Cole was 34 years old. He had brown hair cut short, a scar on his left cheek from a piece of shrapnel that had come too close on Callisto Station, and eyes that looked like they had seen too much and decided to stop being surprised by anything. He was not tall, not short, not loud, not quiet. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and you did not notice him until you needed him, and then you were very glad he was there. He had lost his younger brother, Pete, during the siege of Callisto Station 3 years ago. Pete had been 22. He had died pulling a wounded Marine out of a collapsing corridor. And Cole had been 2 decks away, close enough to hear the explosion, but too far to do anything about it. That was the thing about loss. It did not make you angry forever. It did not make you sad forever. It just made you tired. And Cole was very, very tired. The intercom crackled. Captain Beckett's voice came through, calm and clear. All hands, this is the captain. We are responding to a distress signal from Velnari space. I am not going to pretend this is safe. It is not. But someone is dying out there, and we are the only ones close enough to help. Marine detachment, suit up and stand by. Cole put down his cleaning cloth. He picked up his rifle. He checked the charge, checked the sight, checked the magazine. Everything was in order. Everything was always in order. He did not know what was waiting for him out there. He did not know that in a few hours he would be standing in front of an alien queen, laying his weapon on the ground, and saying words that would change the course of 2 civilizations. All he knew was that someone needed help, and he was close enough. The Longhorn jumped into Velnari space 6 hours later and found a graveyard. Hundreds of shattered ships floated in the darkness, their hulls cracked open like eggs, their insides spilling out into the void. Some were still burning, little orange fires that flickered and died in the vacuum. The light of the dying star behind them painted everything in shades of red and gold, and it would have been beautiful if it were not so terrible. And there at the center of it all, barely holding together, was the Ascendant Crown. It was enormous. Even damaged, even dark, it was the biggest ship anyone on the Longhorn had ever seen. Its hull was organic, grown rather than built, and it looked like a living thing that was slowly dying. Parts of it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat that was getting weaker. Captain Beckett stared at it through the viewport and said quietly, My God. Danny Voss stood beside her, his face pale. Captain, I count at least 40 swarm warships on the edge of the system. They are holding position. They are not done. Beckett nodded. Then neither are we. Helm, take us in. Docking protocols. And someone wake up Sergeant Harding. Tell him he has got work to do. On the bridge of the Ascendant Crown, Queen Thyravine watched the small human ship approach on her flickering screens. She watched it slip between the wreckage of her once mighty fleet, careful and slow, like a small animal walking through a field of bones. She did not know what to feel. Relief, shame, anger, hope. They all mixed together in her chest until she could not tell them apart. Someone had come. Someone had actually come. She straightened on her throne. She lifted her remaining arms. She set her face into the cold, proud mask that her mother had taught her to wear. The mask that said, I am a queen, and I am not afraid. But behind that mask, in the deepest part of herself, in the place where queens are just people, Thyravine was afraid. She was very afraid. And she was grateful.